the policies. We'll find out further on the 31st of October when he sets out the full picture, both the spending and the tax side of things. So I think she's gone a long way to stabilise matters. You've seen that in the markets. The markets are now much calmer than they were. And I think once we get through the 31st of October, I think we'll be much calmer waters then.
OK. Let's bring in Seema Malhotra for the Labour Party Shadow Business Minister. Seema, what do you think Keir Starmer will want to hear from the Prime Minister today?
I think what we will want to hear, I think what the country will want to hear is, firstly, an apology in Parliament from the Prime Minister. I think there's no point just apologising in a media interview or doing it from hiding under a table or not hiding under a table. I think people are really worried about what's coming. And I think there's a worry for me that the government is now going to get complacent by saying that they've slightly stabilised the markets for now. I mean, what situation are we in if we're watching gilt yield every day and seeing that is somehow a new normal behaviour? I want to hear from the Prime Minister on whether she has really realised the impact that her decisions have had, because this is a crisis made in Downing Street. We know that inflation's up, borrowing's up, mortgage rates up, and I've had a constituent contact me with their new mortgage rate, which is 6.1%. I want to hear her apologise in Parliament to him and to others across the country, so many families across the country who are now paying a Tory premium of hundreds of pounds extra on their mortgage bills every day. That hasn't stopped. This is the reason why I think the Prime Minister has to acknowledge the damage has been done. And she may have changed her Chancellor to have the fourth now Tory Chancellor in 4 months. But we haven't seen the stability and the financial stability and the economic stability that our country desperately needs.
John Stevenson for the Conservatives, that is a fair point, isn't it? You're right to say the markets have stabilised, but the fact is that they only wobbled because of the policies that she tried to implement. Well,
they have stabilised now, but we've also got to accept there's an international scene going on here as well. Interest rates are rising in the United Kingdom, but they're rising across the world, America and Europe.
But there was a massive spike in all of the metrics. We know that after the mini-budget.
But as we've now got now got stability, you've seen interest rates start to drop back to more normal values. We've also seen across the world inflation rising, we've seen interest rates rising, so we're not unique in that sense. What I think we've now got is stability from the new Chancellor. We'll have his programme set out in the 31st of October, which will set out exactly where we are in tax and spend, and I think you'll see far greater stability in the markets, which then allows us to concentrate on growing the economy. Because one thing the Prime Minister did get absolutely right when she set out her vision originally was we have to grow the economy, and it's only through growing the economy that we will improve people's lives, we'll see levelling up happen, we'll see a rebalancing in the economy, and we will see the finances of the country improve, which then allow you to spend money on public services. So we've got to get the fundamentals right. The vision that the Prime Minister originally set out was absolutely correct. Unfortunately, how they went about it initially was wrong, and I think she's fully accepted that. But where we are now is in a much better place, and I think you'll see improvements in the course of the next few months.
Seema Malhotra said that she would like to see an apology. Do you think we'll get an apology from the Prime Minister?
Well, I think the Prime Minister's already set out that in her interview earlier in the week. I think we need to move on from that. We have we've now got the new Chancellor in place. I think we've got the policies that we've got to look forward to on the 31st of October. We've got to set out the agenda for the future. I think next year you'll start to see inflation fall. I think you'll start to see gas prices hopefully drop as well, and I think you'll start to see an improved economic position. The Chancellor's absolutely right. We've got to be fiscally conservative to make sure that we do balance the books so that the markets are comfortable with what we are doing. But I actually think that is precisely what is happening.
Seema Malhotra, let's just bring you back in. I mean, as John was saying, things are a lot more stable than they were even as recently as Monday.
Let's look at what's coming now. This is not over. We have now seen the Prime Minister and the Chancellor talking about public sector cuts, public services cuts that could end up being another austerity season 2. And we're still recovering from season 1. And let's not forget the Chancellor was also in government and part of this austerity season 1. I do not understand how the government are now saying that working people, pensioners, and now our public services are going to be the ones that need to pay for the mistakes that the government has made. These were not things being talked about 3 or 4 weeks ago. The damage has been done, and the consequences now are going to be felt by the British people. And if the Conservatives think that cutting doctors and nurses and our police are going to be a way out of this Tory-created mess, a mess made in Downing Street by the Prime Minister and her chancellors, then I think they've got another thing coming, and the British people are going to want to hear much better than this from the Prime Minister.
We're joined now by Christine Jardin from the Liberal Democrats. I understand that Liberal Democrats are possibly reaping the benefits of Liz Truss's lack of popularity. You've seen quite a lot more donors in some contentious seats.
Oh yes, but sadly I don't like to think of it as reaping the benefits. I think what we're seeing is a reflection of people's dissatisfaction with Liz Truss and her government and the chaos.
Because experience says if that's what we do...
I'm so sorry, Christine. We're going to have to pause you now. We're going to Folkestone to the East Kent Trust to hear what they're saying about the deaths of babies and mothers.
Families who have been harmed telling us about service failures that the NHS should have known about first and did not. In carrying out the investigation, I've kept that in mind as much as, but not more than, what has actually happened in East Kent. What has happened in East Kent is deplorable and harrowing. We have numerous instances of care that was not given to the right standards, consistently failed to meet standards, with deaths and significant harm in scores of families. We had 202 families that came forward. In 97, deaths, injuries or other harm could have been different if care had been given to the standards accepted nationally. In 45 of the 65 stillborn and newborn babies who died, they could have had a different outcome had care been given to the standards accepted nationally. As well as that, we found that there had been frequent instances where significant harm was caused to people's well-being by the unkind and callous way on occasions that they were treated. And some have been deeply affected by that. Many have been deeply affected by that. We haven't found that there's been a single clinical cause of the failure. What we've found is 4 underlying themes that led directly to these problems. The first is extreme failures of team working. As you know, maternity care has to be delivered by groups of professionals working together from different backgrounds, from different professions. They have to work together effectively. They did not. And there are various reasons for that, including lack of trust and lack of respect. But there is also, inescapably, the fact that professionals can sometimes get the impression that they're working to different goals. It might be to reduce the amount of intervention, or it might be to not reduce the amount of intervention. A team that works to different goals, in my view, is not a team. Secondly, failures of professionalism, of compassion and of kindness. People were dealt with rudely, arrogantly, and with hostility. And you'll find numerous examples in the report. Women were not listened to. They reported a range of things that should have been listened to. For example, that they were in labour. For example, that their membranes had ruptured. For example, that the baby's movements had altered. And they were disregarded, and that led directly to instances of harm. The same failures of compassion and listening happened after devastating outcomes, such as the death of a baby. People were treated with dismissiveness and denial. Not only does that cause people deep distress, it also prevents learning, so that the same set of mistakes kept happening over again because people were not properly looking and learning. On at least 8 separate occasions over a 10-year period, the Trust Board was presented with what should have been inescapable signals that there were serious problems in the maternity unit. They could have acknowledged that, they could have investigated, they could have put it right. That started in 2010. The first instance was in 2010. But they didn't. In every single case, they found a way to deny that there were problems, to disregard, to say that on the whole services were okay or at least good enough, and they were wrong to do that. As a result of that, the pattern of behaviour and of harm continued unaltered through the entire period of the investigation till the end of 2020. It need not have happened like that. What do we do? In previous investigations, including my own, we have sought to set out detailed operational recommendations. Change this, do that, don't do that. I think the time has passed to do that. We cannot pretend that this works any longer. All that happens is we have another instance of the same problem cropping up again. As a result of that, I've not sought to set out detailed operational recommendations. I have identified 4 major underlying areas that need to be acted on. And they need other people. I can't do it as an independent investigation, but they need the leadership of the health service, they need ministers, they need NHS England to act on these 4 areas. Otherwise, I very much fear that we will all be back. Probably not me, but you all will be back somewhere else in a year or two's time. The 4 areas. Firstly, we have to find a way to detect dysfunctional units as they're beginning to slide, not after wrong and saying that things have gone wrong with services. We should never be in that position. We have to have a mechanism. I'm proposing a way to do that through something I would call a maternity signalling system, which takes information we largely have and which shows women, it shows clinicians, it shows trusts, and it shows NHS England where people stand on their outcomes and on their safety, and which direction they're trending, and whether the variations from month to month are random or whether they're systematic, and therefore there is a need to look. If we'd had a system like that in 2010, I believe that the problems would have been inescapable then. It's beyond time that we had one, and I think we must work on that. Secondly, I think we have to address the problems of inappropriate and uncaring behaviour that cropped up time and again in East Kent. We heard so many accounts of it. I understand, of course, that NHS staff are operating under strain at the moment. I absolutely appreciate that. But that is not an excuse for uncaring, rude or aggressive behaviour, which is what we found, and we do not believe that this is entirely restricted to East Kent. That would be a dangerous assumption. Third, I think we must have a coherent basis for team working in maternity. Maternity is, like all clinical specialties, dependent on multi-professional groups working together in a coherent team. It's probably more dependent on that than some other specialties, and yet the challenges appear to be greater in maternity. I can't escape the fact that some of that is about people picking up mixed messages about what their objectives are. Are they there to reduce the amount of intervention, or are they there to continue with the same amount of intervention or to do more intervention? You can't have a team that functions with different objectives. And finally, I think we have to address the problem of trusts responding to legitimate inquiries and questions with deflection and denial. They do this in the name of reputation management. It's a cruel practice that ends up with families, such as the ones that I've just been talking to, being denied the truth. That's a terrible thing to do to somebody on the name of protecting your reputation. I think that the current incentives for trusts clearly don't dissuade them from doing it, because it is the standard response. And there has to be a better mechanism to make sure that they don't do that. I think that I would, and I do recommend, a statutory provision for this. It's been called the Hillsborough Law in the past, but it would place, if enacted, it would place a statutory duty, a legal duty on public bodies to be truthful and not to conceal problems when they had arisen. The findings of the investigation are stark, and the conclusions are shocking and uncomfortable. I thank everybody who has helped us. That includes the staff of the Trust, but most of all, the families who gave of their time and a lot of themselves to help us understand what had happened. We owe it to all of them to listen, to take very seriously what has happened, and to address the areas that have been set out to make sure, for the sake of services in East Kent and wider, that these problems are eradicated. Thank you. I'm happy to take questions that you might have at the moment.
Thank you. We'll go through a quick list of questions, if that's all right, and so we can keep going until everyone's had a
Well, that was Dr Bill Kirkup there. In his own words, described as stark and shocking this report that he's carried out into treatment of women and babies at East Kent Hospitals, University NHS Trust. He said their treatment was deplorable and harrowing, that 45 of 65 babies who died, stillborn, could have had a different outcome. He said that the 4 underlying failures were failures of teamwork, failures of professionalism, failures of listening to women, treating women who were going through a really difficult time with rudeness, hostility and a lack of compassion, and said that the Trust knew about these problems 10 years ago. The board were told 8 times in 10 years, he said. They didn't act and they were wrong. And this pattern of behaviour and calamity happened all the way to the end of 2020. And he has suggested a number of things, including making it a statutory requirement that bodies such as this have to respond truthfully. He said that the Trust deflected and denied problems when families brought it to them, and that this has to stop, that it made the situation worse for families. The same mistakes happened again and again. A really damning report into what has happened over a 10-year period at East Kent Hospitals, University NHS Trust. I'm sure we'll have a lot more on that throughout the day here on Sky News. But for now, we're just about to reach the point on a Wednesday when we have Prime Minister's questions, and it's been a terrifically difficult week for the Prime Minister once again. Our political editor, Beth Rigby, is here with me in the studio. Beth, she left Number 10 just some 20 minutes ago, heading to the Commons. What is going on? This is another tough week for her as it is, but we're also now seeing this potential vote on fracking coming this afternoon from the Labour Party.
I think it's fair to say that this is still a government very much in chaos. And as I understand it, the Prime Minister has also recently suspended one of her own team in Number 10 amid allegations of briefing against other MPs. So there's another crisis emerging for her within her own team.
And meanwhile, we've got letters to Graham Brady. It's coming out of 4 sides.
Yes, and in terms of Prime Minister's questions, number one, she has to try and put in a really great performance because MPs want to see how she can stand up against Keir Starmer after all of these U-turns. But even despite that, as you said, there is now a big battle over a fracking motion that Labour are putting onto the floor today, and there is talk about Graham Brady indicating to the Prime Minister that he is setting a higher threshold for a potential confidence vote. Now, she should be protected from a confidence vote for a year as new Prime Minister. Under the traditional rules, you have to have 15% of the parliamentary party, that's 54 MPs, writing to the chair of the backbench committee to say that he wants a confidence vote. And let's listen in.
In
this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When the penny dropped for the Prime Minister on Monday and she realised that her budget was responsible for crashing the economy, she should have come to this House to explain herself and to apologise to the millions of people who will now be paying hundreds of pounds extra a month on their mortgages because of her mistakes. But now she's here, can she tell us, given the absolute chaos her government has created, why the Chancellor lost his job but she kept hers?
Mr. Speaker, I have been very clear that I am sorry and that I have made mistakes. But the right thing to do in those circumstances is to make changes, which I've made, and to get on with the job and deliver for the British people. And Mr. Speaker, we've delivered the energy price guarantee, we've helped people this winter, and I will continue to do that.
Lawrence Robertson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that local people and local councils are best placed to decide how many houses they need and where those houses should go? And if she does, will she end the top-down approach to housing targets and reduce or preferably remove the powers of the planning inspectorate?
Prime Minister.
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right. We will abolish the top-down housing targets. We want... Mr. Speaker, we want decisions about homes, about infrastructure, driven by local people, not driven by Whitehall. And that's why we're setting up new, locally driven investment zones.
We now come to the Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A book is being written about the Prime Minister's time in office. Apparently, it's going to be out by Christmas. Is that the release date or the title?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I have been in office for just under 2 months, and I have delivered the energy price guarantee, making sure that people aren't paying £6,000 bills this winter. I've reversed the national insurance increase, and I've also taken steps, and we will be taking steps, to crack down on the militant unions. Now, what, Mr. Speaker? I think, Mr. Speaker, that is more of a record of action than the honourable gentleman in his 2.5 years in the job.
Mr. Speaker, last week the Prime Minister ignored every question put to her. Instead, she repeatedly criticised Labour's plan for a 6-month freeze on energy bills. This week, the Chancellor made it her policy. How can she be held to account when she's not in charge?
Well, Mr. Speaker, our policy is to protect the most vulnerable for 2 years. I had to take the decision, because of the economic situation, to adjust our policies. I am somebody who's prepared to front up. I'm prepared to take the tough decisions. Unlike the honourable gentleman, who hasn't done anything on businesses, he's done nothing to say he'll protect people after 1 year. He's got no plan.
Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, last week the Prime Minister stood there and promised absolutely no spending reductions. They all cheered. This week, the Chancellor announced a new wave of cuts. What's the point of a Prime Minister whose promises don't even last a week?
Prime Minister.
Well, I can assure the right honourable gentleman that spending will go up next year and it will go up the year after. But of course, we need to get value for taxpayers' money. The Labour Party has pledged hundreds of billions of spending pledges, none of which they've retracted. The honourable gentleman needs to reflect the economic reality in his policies.
Mr. Speaker, those spending cuts are on the table for one reason and one reason only, because they crashed the economy. And working people are going to have to pay 500 quid more a month on their mortgages. And what's the Prime Minister's response? To say she's sorry. What does she think people will think and say? That's all right, I don't mind financial ruin. At least she apologised.
Prime Minister.
I do think there has to be some reflection of economic reality from the party opposite. The fact is that interest rates are rising across the world, and the economic conditions have worsened. And we are being honest. We're levelling with the public, unlike the honourable gentleman who simply won't do it. And what is the honourable gentleman doing about the fact that train workers are again going on strike? The fact is he refuses to condemn the workers. We are bringing forward policies. Mr. Speaker, we are bringing forward policies that are going to make sure our railways are protected, people going to work are protected. He backs the strikers, we back the strivers.
Mr. Speaker, she's asking me questions because we're a government in waiting and they're an opposition in waiting. There's no getting away from this. Millions of people are facing horrendous mortgage repayments. And she's admitted it's her fault. She shouldn't have conducted an economic experiment on the British public. But it's not just her. They put her there. They're keeping her there. Why on earth would anyone trust the Tories with the economy ever again?
Well, I notice, Mr. Speaker, he's not actually objecting to a single economic policy that the Chancellor announced on Monday. He's refusing to condemn the strikers. We're on the side of working people. We're going to legislate to make sure we keep our railways open. The honourable gentleman refuses to do anything.
Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, the only mandate she's ever had is from members opposite. It was a mandate built on fantasy economics, and it ended in disaster. The country's got nothing to show for it except the destruction of the economy and the implosion of the Tory party. I've got the list here. 45p tax cut, gone. Corporation tax cut, gone. 20p tax cut, gone. 2-year energy freeze, gone. Tax-free shopping, gone. Economic credibility, gone. And her supposed best friend, the former Chancellor, he's gone as well. They're all gone. So why is she still here?
Mr. Speaker, I am a fighter and not a quitter. I have acted in the national interest to make sure that we have economic stability.
Prime Minister. Order. Order. I'm going to hear the Prime Minister. I suggest that all members need to hear the answer. Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I am a fighter and not a quitter. We have delivered on the energy price guarantee. We've delivered on the energy price guarantee. We've delivered on national insurance. We are going to deliver to stop the militant trade unions disrupting our railways. The honourable gentleman has no idea, he has no plan, and he has no alternative.
James Grundy. Just sit down. Sit. Can I just say, he's obviously the more popular choice. Come on, James Grundy. You've got a future.
Would my right honourable friend congratulate Lee Centurion's rugby league team on their recent promotion to Super League, bringing millions to the local economy? And furthermore, would she also guarantee there are excellent women's Euros team, including Ella Toon from my constituency, Tilsley, will receive the number 10 reception that they so deserve?
Prime Minister.
Well, I join my honourable friend in congratulating the Lee Centurions on their return to the Super League. I had the huge privilege of meeting the Lionesses last week, a fantastic team who won a major tournament for us. We will host the Downing Street reception as soon as their training programme makes them available.
I look forward to Rugby League invite as well. Let's now come to the leader of the SNP, Ian Black.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. After 10 U-turns in 2 weeks, we're left with a Prime Minister in office, but not in power. And families are paying through the teeth for her mistakes. Her latest broken promise has put pensioners in the front line of Tory cuts. So, can the Prime Minister perhaps turn to her Chancellor right now, get permission to make another U-turn and commit to raising the state pension at the rate of inflation?
Prime Minister.
I honestly don't know what the honourable gentleman is talking about, because we have been clear in our manifesto that we will maintain the triple lock, and I am completely committed to it. So is the Chancellor.
Well, Mr. Speaker, it's no surprising that the Prime Minister's approval ratings are collapsing with an answer like that. The worst polling result for any Prime Minister in history. She's just thrown 12 million pensioners under the Tory bus. And it's not just pensioners feeling the pain. In the last week alone,
also want to hear Mr Blackford.
Mr Speaker, it's not just pensioners feeling the pain. In the last week alone, inflation has risen to a 40-year high. Mortgage rates are at the highest level since the financial crash. And people's energy bills are about to rise to more than £5,000. Can the Prime Minister answer one simple question? Why does she expect everyone else to pay the price for her failure?
Prime Minister.
I don't think the honourable gentleman can take yes for an answer. I've been clear we are protecting the triple lock on pensions. And if the honourable gentleman is concerned about the economy, why does he continue to advocate for separatism, which would plunge the Scottish economy into chaos?
Jerry Sambrook.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Over the last couple of years, thousands of homes have been proposed or built in Birmingham Northfield constituency, which puts a huge strain on GP and dentist appointments. Would my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, agree with me that more needs to be done in the planning process to make sure that when we have large-scale developments, we have more capacity in those vital services?
Prime Minister.
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right. When we build new houses, we need to make sure there are GP surgeries, schools, infrastructure, and that's why we're introducing a new infrastructure levy to make sure more of the money from developers goes on supporting local communities.
Ed Davey.
Mr Speaker, millions of family carers have been forced to cut back on food and heating. One told Carers UK, my son is incontinent. If we don't wash him in warm water several times a day, this will cause him to physically decline. So how do we pay for the gas to heat the water if we are currently at max budget? Vulnerable people and carers are struggling enough already in this cost of living crisis, Mr Speaker. So will the Prime Minister guarantee that support for the vulnerable, including carers allowance, will rise by at least today's inflation rate of 10.1%?
Yes. Prime Minister.
People are struggling. It is difficult at the moment. That's why we put in place the energy price guarantee to make sure the typical household isn't paying more than £2,500. It's why we've supplied an extra £1,200 of support to the most vulnerable. And I can assure the Right Honourable Gentleman we will always support the most vulnerable. They will be our priority.
Faye Jones.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr Speaker. Brecon and Radnorshire has a proud military footprint. Not least the Cambrian Patrol exercise, which I visited last week. It is considered the Olympic gold medal in infantry training, attracting teams from across the world to compete in a 60-kilometre march over 2 days in the Brecon Beacons. Will the Prime Minister join me in congratulating all those who took part, not least the team of Gurkha soldiers from the Infantry Battle School in Brecon who took home a coveted gold medal, further cementing Brecon's special place in the UK Armed Forces?
I join my honourable friend in thanking everybody at Brecon Barracks who organises the exercise Cambrian Patrol each year. It is a world-class training exercise, and I congratulate Brecon's Gurkha soldiers for their fantastic achievement of a gold medal. Well done.
Dr. Philippa Whitford.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. It took just 5 working days for the Prime Minister to crash the pound, damage pension funds and send people's mortgage costs spiralling. Her new Chancellor may have reversed almost all of her policies, but the damage has been done and we now face yet another round of Tory cuts and austerity. So I'd like to ask the Prime Minister and those sitting behind her, why is she still at the dispatch box? And when will voters get their say on this disastrous government?
Prime Minister.
We are facing very, very difficult economic times. I took the decision I had to in the interest of economic stability. And what is important is we work together, including with the SNP, to get through this winter and grow the economy.
David Jones.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Prime Minister is to be commended for securing the passage of the Northern Ireland Protocol Bill through this House without amendment before the summer recess. Can she confirm that it's the government's intention that the bill should remain unamended, and in particular that the European Court of Justice should have no jurisdiction in any part of the United Kingdom?
Prime Minister.
I am completely committed to the Northern Ireland Protocol Bill. It deals with the very specific issues we face in Northern Ireland, the free flow of trade, and also making sure that the people of Northern Ireland are able to benefit from being part of the United Kingdom. And I can tell my honourable friend that any negotiations will reflect the same position that is in the Protocol Bill.
Dame Meg Hillier.
Mr. Speaker, we understand that this afternoon's vote on fracking is deemed a confidence vote in the Prime Minister. Can she give us any reason why her own backbenchers or anyone in this country can have confidence in her after her policies have caused chaos in the markets and wrecked the economy?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we do face very difficult economic times. I have been honest about the mistakes I have made. But what I don't apologise for is the fact that we have helped households through this winter, through the energy price guarantee, the fact that we've reversed the national insurance rise, and the fact we are taking action to get our railways running rather than being disrupted by the militant trade unions she supports.
John Barron.
Mr. Speaker, there's been a number of low points recently, including the Republic of Ireland's football team singing pro-IRA songs in the changing room. We should never forget the sacrifice of those who paid the price to maintain the peace during the Troubles. Closer to home, recent events meant that spending is going to be more constrained than originally thought. May I encourage the Prime Minister to ensure that we retain compassion in politics in these decisions, including maintaining the link between benefits and inflation. Will she do that?
Prime Minister.
We are compassionate Conservatives. We will always work to protect the most vulnerable, and that is what we did with the energy price guarantee. We are going to make sure the most vulnerable are protected into year 2, and I'm sure the Chancellor has heard my honourable friend's representations on the contents of the medium-term fiscal plan.
Stuart Malcolm MacDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, like the public at large, I've supported the government in terms of the actions it has taken to support Ukraine, not least because of what's at stake there. But right now, in order to maintain that support, as the public deals with rising prices, inflation, mortgage costs and much else, Ukraine fatigue is a real and present danger. And I'm afraid to say to the Prime Minister, she is now an active driver against that public support that has so unified many of us, many of us to do what needs to be done. So in a time where resolve in support of Ukraine needs to be steeled, will she make sure that she commits from the dispatch box that the economic and military and political support won't be another casualty under this Prime Minister?
It was one of my first acts in office to make sure the military support we give to Ukraine is equal to the military support we gave this year. We must make sure Ukraine win. They can win, they will win, and they must win.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to thank the Prime Minister for sticking by her words and giving communities in Fylde the final say on fracking. But as always, the devil is in the detail. Can the Prime Minister assure me that local consent will be measured independently and transparently, and under no circumstances will fracking companies be directly engaged in assessing local consent? And if people in Fylde say no, that view and that decision will be respected and acted upon by this government?
Well, I very strongly agree with my honourable friend. I know this is something he cares deeply about. I can assure him that we will consult on the robust system of local consent, give clear advice on seismic limits and safety, before any fracking takes place. And the consultation will consider all of the relevant people, the regional mayors, the local authorities and parishes, as well as the concerns of those directly affected. And my right honourable friend, the Business Secretary, will be saying more about this later today.
Kate Osborne.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Privatisation does not work. It doesn't work for our NHS. We have another Amber Alert in the NHS Blood Service, a service that this week's Chancellor sold when he was Health Secretary. And it doesn't work for our postal service, with Royal Mail Group taking £758 million in profit last year, yet our universal service obligation is at risk. Workers' pay conditions and 10,000 jobs are at threat. Will the Prime Minister continue to let obscene amounts of profit be made while services are cut and stamp prices rise, or will she launch an inquiry into the gross mismanagement of Royal Mail?
Prime Minister.
What we need is an efficient postal service that delivers for people across this country, and that's what I'm focused on, not making ideological points.
Duncan Baker.
Thank you, Mr. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When I was in business, it was a real privilege to employ very many talented, bright young people. I always found that when you believed in somebody, when you gave them the opportunity, they went on to thrive in their career. That's why tomorrow, in North Norfolk, I'll be launching my new scheme, the 100 Apprenticeship Challenge, to drive 100 new apprenticeships all over a rural constituency. Would the Prime Minister please thank not just my DWP office and Julia Nix, who's been fantastic, the district councils, the county councils, and an awful lot of stakeholders who worked for over 6 months to deliver this fantastic scheme to drive growth and jobs for young people across my constituency.
Well, I do want to thank Julia and her team for the fantastic job they're doing, and also you as the local member of, my right honourable friend as the local member of Parliament. Apprenticeships are a fantastic way for people to learn and gain experience, and I'm proud that we've created 5.1 million apprenticeships since 2010.
Smith.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff is in hot water after lobbying on behalf of a Libyan warlord and big tobacco. It turns out he's also lobbied for PPE giants Santé Global. Is it wise to have a lobbyist at the centre of Downing Street?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, all appointments in Downing Street are properly checked through the propriety and ethics process, and that is the way that we do it in a completely impartial way.
Andrew Mitchell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When my right honourable friend was Foreign Secretary, I know that she was acutely aware of the importance of British soft power acting in our national interest. Will she confirm today the promise we both made in 2010 when this government first came into office, that she will not balance the books on the backs of the poorest people in the world?
Minister.
Well, can I pay tribute to my right honourable friend for the fantastic work he did as International Development Secretary, and I am proud that we have rebalanced our international development budget to focus more on humanitarian aid and more on women and girls, and no doubt more details will be set out in due course.
Sarah Owen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The last Tory Prime Minister was forced out after a series of dodgy dealings and failing to take responsibility for any of it. So what's this Prime Minister getting the boot for? Her plan that crashed the economy, forcing fracking on communities who don't want it, or will she do the decent thing and go and call a general election?
I have taken responsibility and I have made the right decision in the interests of the country's economic stability.
Steve Bryan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Every single member in this House will have constituents waiting for treatment within the COVID backlog. The Health Secretary's priorities are absolutely right, including her B for tackling the backlogs. Can the Prime Minister reassure me that the government is committed to the series of elective hubs that we've promised, including at the Royal Hampshire County Hospital in my Winchester constituency?
Prime Minister.
Well, my right honourable friend, the Health Secretary, has set out her plans to deliver on dealing with the COVID backlog, and she will continue to work on that and make sure we deal with what was a massive pandemic, creating a backlog. We will deal with it.
Gardner.
Since the mini-budget, thousands of my constituents have been in mental anguish and despair. I recognise that the Honourable Lady has faced a week of mental anguish and despair herself. She has had people angry with her, she's had people who have mocked her. But having had that experience, what will she now do to improve the healthcare, the mental health care for people in this country, so that the anguish that they face in the coming months is properly responded to and dealt with?
My right honourable friend, the Health Secretary, has set out a very clear plan of how we're going to deal with the backlog created by COVID, how we're going to make sure people get timely GP appointments, and how we're going to improve on the services in our hospitals, including mental health services.
Waitley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The government is facing tough choices, but people living with dementia face unlimited care costs, and that is not a choice. Can my right honourable friend assure me that she is committed to social care reform to end that worry and relieve pressure on the NHS?
Prime Minister.
Yes, we are committed to social care reform. We do need to deal with those issues.
Greasy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's always better to see a Prime Minister at her desk rather than underneath it. And now that she's here, I wonder if she could tell us why next week this House will be discussing legislation that will abolish vital protections on pension payouts. It will abolish our right to watch the Olympics free of charge and airline consumer laws. How is any of the retained law bill in the British interest?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I think we have yet another example of somebody who doesn't want to support the British public's decision to leave the European Union in 2016. Isn't it quite incredible, Mr. Speaker, that 6 years after people voted to leave the European Union, there are people who object to taking EU law off our statute books. Now, I'm a Democrat. I respect what British people voted for. I suggest the Right Honourable Lady does the same.
Richard Graham.
Mr. Speaker, 30 years ago, the Westminster Foundation for Democracy was created out of the war in Bosnia so that democracies could flourish and freedom and prosperity come with it. This evening, in your rooms, we celebrate that anniversary by hearing directly from our country representative in Ukraine, from the chair of the Taiwanese Foreign Affairs Committee, and the leader of the opposition in Uganda. A good example of the range of contacts that this great cross-party body, funded by government, is working with. Can I ask the Prime Minister if she agrees that this is a vital contribution by our government and our people to democracy around the world, and will she encourage members around the House to join us this evening?
Prime Minister.
Well, the Westminster Foundation for Democracy does a fantastic job, and I think we know from what has happened in Ukraine, the appalling war perpetrated by Vladimir Putin, just how precious democracy is and how much we need to do to work with our friends and allies to protect democracy around the world. And I do encourage colleagues from all sides of the House to attend the event tonight.
That now completes Prime Minister's questions. I'll let the House clear.
Well, the House is clearing at the end of Prime Minister's questions. Lots to discuss. Let's bring in our political editor, Beth Rigby. I mean, first of all, Beth, there's the to and fro between her and Keir Starmer, but also, quite crucially, what appears to be a divergence of policy between her and her Chancellor.
So it started off as the main story of this PMQs being the exchanges between Starmer and her, the leader of the opposition, with this kind of mix of mockery and contempt for the Prime Minister, who for her part said, "I am a fighter," actually borrowing Peter Mandelson's line there. But she was really in fighting form there, trying to put in a good performance. But the bombshell in that chamber was her response to a question on uplifting or maintaining the pensions triple lot. This is when pensions rise in line with inflation, if that's the highest of three areas where you might lift it by. But essentially, it's like, will you lift pensions? Will you uprate them with inflation? Now, Jeremy Hunt clearly said on Monday that he would not commit to this policy. He said, "I'm not making any specific commitments on spending until October the 31st. He explicitly ruled it out in an interview with me where I explicitly asked. He explicitly ruled it out in the Commons. The Prime Minister has stood up there and has overruled her Chancellor. She has said in the Commons that it was a manifesto commitment, it was a pledge she made when she was trying to be leader, and she has said clearly there on the floor of the Commons, I am committed to uprating with inflation pensions. Now, there's a couple of things going on there. One, she's facing a backbench rebellion on this issue. A number of MPs have already come out publicly saying this was a manifesto commitment, it was a promise you made when you were leader, you cannot undo it. So she knew she had a political battle. But the issue is that she brought Jeremy Hunt in order to steady the ship, calm the markets. He took control of tax and spend decisions quite clearly on Monday, and the Prime Minister there at the dispatch box has publicly overruled him. Now, I've got so many questions on that. Does he agree with her? If he doesn't, how will he react? Will this unnerve the markets that the Prime Minister is again making policy on the hoof that she might have to U-turn on? She's done another U-turn on a U-turn. And so the reason that this is politically really interesting is that she needs Jeremy Hunt in order to have any credibility at all of staying in number 10. And she has just publicly overruled him in the Commons. And I'm very interested to see how Jeremy Hunt and the Treasury react to that. Now, maybe he was fine with that, but that was not what he said 48 hours ago. And hasn't the story of this government in terms of the market turmoil and the voter dissatisfaction being about saying one thing, doing another, saying one thing, doing another? And the Prime Minister has just done that again when Jeremy Hunt said, I'm making no specific tax and spend commitments until the fiscal statement on October the 31st. She just blew that up.
Well, indeed, and that contradicted something she'd said about no more spending cuts last week,
Exactly.
which, again, he absolutely ruled out 3 days later on the Friday.
And so if you are... That's exactly right, Jane. So if you're a Conservative MP, you have a Prime Minister that says things at the dispatch box. Is there any credibility at all in what she says? Why is she undermining what was set up in order to be an attempt to stabilise things? And I think that there's a question for me, certainly, like, was that an agreed decision? James Cleverly, her Foreign Secretary, was on Sky News this morning refusing to commit to that policy. And that's another element of this, Jane. If you're a Prime Minister and you're very embattled, as she clearly is, you need your cabinet to back you, because if one of them decides that they're going to stand down, that's when it could trigger the flood of resignations. And that's what happened, you'll remember, with Boris Johnson. Sajid Javid went, Rishi Sunak went, and that was the tipping point, and the herd moved. And then he was gone by Thursday morning that week, OK? So the question I've got is, James Cleverly has just been contradicted hours later by the Prime Minister. Jeremy Hunt has just been contradicted by the Prime Minister. Did she get an agreement, or is she just trying to overrule her Chancellor? And if she is, what's the backlash going to be? I don't know the answers, it's just happened, but my analysis would be that that could be a real hot potato for her. Let's see what... I'm very interested to see how Jeremy Hunt reacts to that.
Fascinating times. Well, ahead of Prime Minister's questions, we spoke to a panel of voters in Bridgewater in Somerset, Conservative voters in the Conservative heartlands, a true blue constituency that's voted Conservative for decades. Well, let's return there now, and our West of England correspondent, Dan Whitehead. Dan, what kind of response has there been?
Yeah, well, we had our panel watching in our sat truck PMQs throughout that half an hour. Let's get that instant reaction. We are joined back by the panel now. Evelyn Wilton, you are a mobile hairdresser. You've just been watching Liz Truss. She says she is a fighter, not a quitter. Are you convinced?
No, not at all, no. I just don't trust her one bit. She just going around in a circle and she's just always got an answer for everything.
She was trying to reassure
Yeah.
the Commons, her party, the voters that she's still in control. How did you feel that went?
No, I don't think she's still in control. I don't feel that she is.
Really? You didn't get any of the answers that you wanted to reassure you then?
No.
OK, well, let's chat with Alan Jeffrey, a retired secondary school teacher and a pensioner. Alan, we heard there a commitment there on the triple lock pension, committed to that manifesto commitment. Does that come as welcome news for you, and how are you feeling about her performance?
I think it is very useful for those pensioners who really do need it, but there are an awful lot of pensioners who don't necessarily need that. The real people who really need the support are the working class people who aren't pensioners, don't have a pension, and they're having rising prices of their rents, their food costs, their travelling costs, and trying to support their families.
Watching her, how did you feel that performance went?
It was very robotic, and she keeps on repeating the same old statements, which are just words. There's no real actions that she can really do from those words.
Looking at the front bench there, do you feel it's a unified cabinet, a unified government?
Certainly not. There is all sorts of problems all through her government. It's a completely divided Tory party. It's time that we just got rid of them after their 12 years of mismanagement of the economy, mismanagement of our public services. It's time we had a fresh start, and an election really should be on the way to get rid of the mismanagement of this that's carried on this democracy.
You want an election, Alan. Let's bring in a third member who watched the whole of PMQs with us. Our previous guest had to leave, but we were joined now by Claudette Tinsley. You're in your 30s, you're in a graphic design business. Claudette, you were with us watching PMQs. Your initial reaction after a turbulent few weeks on how the Prime Minister dealt with that?
I think she has pretty flimsy promises to offer. They seem to be U-turning, and if you turn around enough, you're going in circles. I think that whatever she says now can change next week. It's changed every couple of days.
So it's a trust issue for you?
Yes, but also their record. They've been in power for 12 years, and they've been given enough chances. They say, "Oh, give her a chance," or "Give this person a chance." But even if they replaced her, they've been given multiple chances repeatedly, and they don't finish their terms. They just swap out the next leader and hope for a fresh start. But
what could you hope that the current Prime Minister does in the next 2 years before an election, or sooner, to convince you that they're in control?
I don't think that they can do anything that would make me believe them, because they've said so many things and have had to U-turn. It's an incredible amount of U-turns. They don't keep their promises, and even the ones that they keep, they don't seem to be popular at all, really. And then they have to make decisions that, by popular demand, against their original promises, such as the help with the energy, that she wasn't leading on that when she was going for her leadership. And then as soon as she got in, she had to say, "Oh yes, we'll help with energy," but it's reluctantly done. So I don't believe whatever she says.
Okay. Evelyn, let's just come back to you quickly. Yeah. Liz Truss talked about there the reiteration on the promise to have that energy price cap.
Yeah.
Everyone's seeing their bills going up. As someone who runs a mobile business and also a home with family members,
Yeah.
Is it enough for you to say, let's just give the government another chance?
No, I don't think so. No. With the electric, people are cutting back, they're economising, and they're keeping their electric off as long as they can.
And that's something you're having to...
Yeah, that's what I'm doing, because I don't want to pay that. It's out of principle as well. Why should we have to pay those extortionate prices in the first place? So, you know, got to keep it off as long as you can. If it means putting blankets over you and jumpers on, then do that.
You were a Boris backer previously.
Yeah.
There's been lots of talk about that, isn't there? I mean, what do you want to happen next? Because a lot of people say we can't go through another leadership
Well, I think
contest.
they should do another vote, a vote for the public, another, you know, because an
election.
Yeah, and if they can, another election. I know they can only do that every 4 years, isn't it? So
well, that's changed. But would you like a general election? Is that what you want now?
Yeah, another general election. Let the public get their votes in and decide.
And Alan, is that the only answer in your opinion? I know that's something you've supported, but it sounds like that not enough has been done in your opinion.
Well, this disastrous government over the last 12 years sort of thing has got us into the situation. It's time to have a real refreshment of policies and the way we're really going to try and support the working people of this country, the people who keep the country going, not the privatised companies that send all the profits from this country abroad.
And just, Claudette, just lastly, interested to know, as a young person, what the big challenges out here in a rural constituency are. What is your top priority for the government and Liz Truss in the time that they've got?
I think supporting workers rather than saying that she says she was supporting the strivers, but that was in relation to trade unions and claiming, it's basically saying that trade union people aren't hard workers. I'm obviously not a trade union person myself, but I support people who are hard workers and our young families, they can't afford all the rising costs of food and electricity and everything. And I feel like that they seem to try and demonise a certain set of workers because they don't suit their needs, but I think that there needs to be more support for workers.
Personally, your biggest concern as a young person, what's top of your list?
Energy is still a top part. It's costs of living, you know, that affect a lot of people. That's the day-to-day cost for most people. It's not something you can escape from. So I think energy still is a big thing. So they're now cutting that help to 6 months. So what happens next year? You know, these promises only last a certain amount of time that they make, and so it's a bit unsure whether they'll keep supporting people and young families, but also older generations. You know, with the pension, it's important to support those that are struggling. And they just seem to keep giving bonuses to bankers. They don't need all these extra bonuses. What we need is more infrastructure support. I think more investment in the railways, more investment in things that used to be nationalised and now are privatised. And all these parts are the key parts. People need to get a bus to get to work. People need a train to get to work. And if they can't afford it and they can't afford to live in the area, you'll end up with people who can't afford to travel to work.
All those issues significant in a rural local location like this. Very quickly, yes or no, give Liz Truss another chance?
No.
Give Liz Truss another chance?
Certainly not.
No, not at all, no.
Well, they're a pretty unanimous poll there from a strong Conservative majority of 25,000 here in Bridgwater. And the panel that we've been speaking to, I think that too many promises have been broken, too many U-turns, and the opinion of these three people here, from businesses to pensioners to young people starting businesses of their own, is that it's gone too far and there have been too many promises broken. And an election seems to be the call from this Conservative stronghold.
Dan, thanks very much for that. Well, let's just take you back to Prime Minister's questions. It was a crucial PMQs for Liz Truss, and we are here analysing her performance. Let's remind ourselves of some of the key exchanges from the Commons a short time ago.
I have been very clear that Mr. Speaker, that I am sorry and that I have made mistakes. But the right thing to do in those circumstances is to make changes, which I've made, and to get on with the job and deliver for the British people.
A book is being written about the Prime Minister's time in office. Apparently, it's going to be out by Christmas. Is that the release date or the title? How can she be held to account when she's not in charge?
Well, Mr. Speaker, our policy is to protect the most vulnerable for 2 years. But I had to take the decision, because of the economic situation, to adjust our policies. I am somebody who's prepared to front up. I'm prepared to take the tough decisions. Unlike the honourable gentleman, who hasn't done anything on businesses, he's done nothing to say he'll protect people after 1 year. He's got no plan.
Mr. Speaker, last week the Prime Minister stood there and promised absolutely no spending reductions. They all cheered. This week, the Chancellor announced a new wave of cuts. What's the point of a Prime Minister whose promises don't even last a week? It was a mandate built on fantasy economics, and it ended in disaster. The country's got nothing to show for it except the destruction of the economy and the implosion of the Tory party. I've got the list here. 45p tax cut, gone. Corporation tax cut, gone. 20p tax cut, gone. 2-year energy freeze, gone. Tax-free shopping, gone. Economic credibility, gone. And her supposed best friend, the former Chancellor, he's gone as well. They're all gone. So why is she still here?
Mr. Speaker, I am a fighter and not a quitter.
Well, we heard from the Conservative MP, John Stevenson, MP for Carlisle, just before the Prime Minister stood up, and he's very kindly come back to give us his verdict on how she did. In terms of her performance, how do you think she did?
Well, it definitely demonstrates her resilience, and I think it was a very robust performance by the Prime Minister. Indeed, I'd probably say it's been her best PMQs outing that she's had, although only 3. So it demonstrated her resilience, her willingness to continue in the job, and I also think she had the bravery to apologise for what she'd done in terms of the original policy decisions, and now she is moving on, which I fully support. We've got to move on. She's got the new Chancellor in place. He's bringing forward the policies that will bring stability to the markets, and more importantly, he will set out our vision for the future on the 31st of October.
Well, you mentioned the Chancellor, but she appeared to contradict something that he had said earlier in the week. He had said that he wasn't going to make any decisions on spending cuts until the end of the month, and then she then announced that the triple lock and pensions would remain. Do you sense that there's something going on there, that there's a divergence between the two of them?
I don't know the conversations that go on between the Prime Minister and her Chancellor, but I do know that was a manifesto commitment, and I think the backbenchers would certainly want to see that be retained as a policy. So I think what the Prime Minister was saying was, in fact, the reality of the situation, which is that there will be that uplift in pensions, and it's something that I would certainly be supporting, and I'm sure my colleagues in the backbenchers would certainly be supporting.
We're going to come to our political editor, Beth Ruby, in a second, but first of all, just need to bring you the latest pictures we have of the Russian President, Vladimir Putin. He's addressing his Security Council in Moscow. Let's listen in.
And we guarantee that this will be done with a guaranteed degree of reliability. Very recently, there has been a lot of disaffection with the order reigning in the armed forces, but I have today issued a decree which rectifies that, and a big allocation from the budget for humanitarian assistance and also for training of personnel. And this, of course, includes volunteers and for the mobilization effort. Colleagues, we are working on improving a large-scale security operation to defend our people and those